The moment was surreal. A grocery store parking lot, usually filled with hurried shoppers and the occasional honk of an impatient driver, had transformed into a stage for something unthinkable. A middle-aged man, wearing a ragged coat and torn sneakers, stood frozen in disbelief. In his shaking hands he held a crumpled lottery ticket. The crowd around him gasped as the store clerk, a cheerful woman named Linda, confirmed what had just happened. "Sir, this is it. You just won $25 million. The words hung in the air, as if they couldn't possibly be real. The man, his name was Thomas, staggered backward, his breath catching. Just an hour ago, he had been counting pennies to buy a loaf of bread. Now, he was a multimillionaire. But then, he did something that left the entire town of Willow Creek speechless. Instead of running off to claim his winnings, he turned to the teenage girl standing behind him in line, her face pale, her arms filled with baby formula and diapers. "How much is her total?" Thomas asked the clerk, his voice steady now. $36.50, Linda answered, still recovering from the shock of what had just happened. Thomas pulled out his wallet, but instead of handing over a single bill, he did something no one could have predicted. "I'll pay for this," he said, then paused. His next words would change everything. "And from now on, I want to pay for everyone in this town who needs help." The store went silent. Then, a single voice broke through the stillness. "Wait, what?" Now let's rewind. 3 hours earlier, Thomas sat on a frozen bench outside the very same grocery store, rubbing his hands together for warmth. His entire life had unraveled over the past 2 years. Once a hard-working mechanic, he had lost his job when the shop he worked at shut down. Then, one misfortune after another had left him with nothing. He had been surviving on kindness, an old friend letting him sleep in their basement for a while, a church handing out free meals, strangers offering him a few dollars when they could. But today, he had nothing. No money. No food. And no hope. That's when he saw it, a discarded lottery ticket fluttering across the parking lot. He picked it up, staring at the numbers. It wasn't his. Someone had thrown it away. He almost put it back down. What were the chances? Probably nothing. But hunger made people desperate, and desperate people clung to hope like a drowning man clings to a life preserver. So, he walked into the store and asked Linda, the clerk, to check it. The moment she scanned the ticket, her mouth fell open. Now back to the present. Thomas, the broke and hopeless man from an hour ago, was suddenly the wealthiest person in the store. And he had just offered to pay for the groceries of a struggling young mother. At first, people thought it was a joke. But then, Thomas reached into his pocket, pulled out a few $20 bills, and handed them over. The young mother, Emily, clutched the diapers against her chest, her eyes welling with tears. She had been scraping by, working 2 jobs while taking care of her newborn daughter. This one act of kindness meant everything. The line behind her started moving again, but the whispers spread. Did he really win the lottery? Is he seriously paying for everyone? Should we let him do this? By the time Thomas had covered the next 5 people's groceries, the entire store was buzzing. Some were grateful, others were hesitant. "Sir, you don't have to do this," Linda finally said, her voice soft. "I know," Thomas replied, his gaze sweeping over the store. "But I want to." And so it began. By the end of the night, the news had spread beyond the store. Reporters arrived. People who had never met Thomas before came just to shake his hand. Families who had been struggling quietly for years found themselves able to eat well for the first time in months. But not everyone was happy. "Scam," someone muttered. "He's just doing this for attention. I bet he's going to regret this when the money runs out. That kind of money changes people. Just watch." Thomas heard the doubts. He saw the skeptical glances. But he didn't care. Because he knew what it was like to have nothing. And now, he had a chance to change that for others. Everything seemed perfect. Until someone walked into the store and changed everything. A man in a sharp suit, accompanied by 2 uniformed officers, strode toward Thomas. He held up a document, his expression unreadable. Mr. Thomas, he said loud enough for the crowd to hear. I'm afraid we have a problem. A hush fell over the store. What kind of problem? Thomas asked cautiously. The man hesitated for just a moment before speaking. The ticket you turned in, it wasn't yours. It was reported lost earlier today. The store erupted into chaos. Thomas froze. What did this mean? Would he lose everything? And most importantly, would he still be able to help all these people? For a moment, everything stood still. The cheerful hum of the grocery store had vanished. Every whisper, every rustling bag, every step halted as the weight of the man's words settled over the crowd. Thomas's heart pounded in his chest. The ticket wasn't mine? The suited man, whose name tag read, David Holloway, State Lottery Commission, nodded grimly. It was reported lost earlier today, he repeated. We need to investigate this before the winnings can be claimed. Thomas looked around, his breath uneven. The once friendly faces of the people he had just helped were now mixed with concern, confusion, even doubt. Someone in the back muttered, I knew it was too good to be true. Linda, the clerk, spoke up. Wait a minute, he found that ticket. Right here in the parking lot. I saw him walk in with it. But David Holloway wasn't budging. That may be true, he said. But we have a claimant, a man named Richard Calloway, who says he purchased the ticket but lost it. Lost it? Thomas echoed, his stomach sinking. Yes. He has proof that he bought a ticket with the same numbers. We need to review surveillance footage and confirm what happened. The entire store held its breath. Thomas had just spent the last 2 hours giving away thousands of dollars, paying for groceries, and promising even more. Now, he might not have a penny to his name. A low voice spoke from the back of the crowd. That's not fair. Everyone turned. It was Emily, the young mother Thomas had helped first. She stepped forward, gripping her baby's diaper bag. Her voice was firm. I saw him find that ticket. He didn't steal it. The crowd murmured in agreement. David sighed. I understand. But if it legally belongs to someone else, we have to return it. A tension filled the air. For the first time in years, Thomas had felt like he had control over his life again. He had finally been in a position to help others, to give back what had been given to him when he had nothing. And now, it could all be taken away in an instant. The officers flanked him, watching closely, as David continued. We're going to need you to come with us, Mr. Thomas. Just to clear things up. Thomas hesitated, his mind racing. He had nowhere to run, and honestly, he didn't want to run. But the weight of disappointment threatened to crush him. Linda suddenly spoke. I'll close the register and go with him. Emily straightened. Me too. Then, shockingly, more voices followed. I'll go. I saw him find it too. I'll back him up. One by one, people in the store, people who had been strangers to Thomas an hour ago, stepped forward to stand with him. Thomas's eyes burned. He had been alone for so long. But now these people, mothers, cashiers, elderly shoppers, teenagers, were standing up for him. David Holloway looked at the growing crowd, his expression unreadable. He glanced at the officers, then at Thomas. All right, he said at last. Let's get this sorted out. But I have to warn you, if Richard Calloway's claim is legitimate, the money is his. Thomas took a deep breath and nodded. He had nothing to lose. And if he had learned anything tonight, it was that even if he walked out of this with nothing, he wouldn't be alone anymore. As he followed Holloway and the officers out of the store, one thought burned in his mind. What if Calloway was lying? What if the money really was his? And more importantly, what would happen if the truth came out? The ride to the state lottery office was silent. Thomas sat in the back of the police car, staring out the window, his mind racing. Beside him, Linda and Emily sat in their own cars, following behind. The entire town of Willow Creek now knew what had happened. What if the man claiming the ticket was telling the truth? What if the millions weren't his after all? And then, another thought struck him, a more painful one. What if they took everything back? The groceries, the help, the hope he had given? When they arrived at the lottery office, David Holloway led them into a conference room. The walls were bare except for a large state lottery logo behind the desk. Sitting at that desk was a man in his late 50s, dressed in an expensive gray suit. His hair was neatly combed, and a thin smirk played on his lips. Richard Calloway, the supposed, real owner of the winning ticket. "You must be Thomas," Calloway said, his voice smooth but cold. "Looks like we have a little problem here." Thomas didn't answer. He just stared at the man, searching his face for some hint of truth or deception. David sat down, opening a file. "All right, gentlemen. We need to get to the bottom of this. Mr. Calloway, you claimed this ticket was yours?" "That's right," Calloway said without hesitation. "I bought it yesterday evening at the BP gas station. I always play those numbers. I remember putting it in my coat pocket. It must have fallen out when I pulled out my wallet." David nodded, flipping through some papers. "And you have proof of purchase?" Calloway slid a small receipt across the table. "Right there. Bought it at 6:42 p.m. Thomas leaned forward, his heart pounding. The receipt was real. It matched the winning numbers. Had he been wrong? Had he really picked up someone else's winning ticket? David frowned, rubbing his chin. "This receipt confirms you bought a ticket, but it doesn't prove you lost it." Calloway scoffed. "What else could have happened? He found it, didn't he?" David turned to Thomas. "Do you remember what time you found the ticket?" Thomas thought hard. "I don't know the exact time, but it was late afternoon. Maybe 4 or 5. David checked his notes. "That's important. If he found it before 6:42 p.m., then this can't be Calloway's ticket." Linda, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke up. "The store has cameras. We can check the footage." Calloway's smirk faltered. It was barely noticeable, but Thomas saw it. David nodded. "All right, let's get that footage." Within minutes, an officer was sent to the grocery store to collect the security video. As they waited, the tension in the room grew thick. Calloway tapped his fingers on the table. "Listen, why don't we just be fair about this?" he said suddenly. "I'll split the winnings. 50-50. Thomas narrowed his eyes. "If it's your ticket, why would you split it?" Calloway blinked. "Well, I don't want any trouble. Just trying to be generous." Emily crossed her arms. "You weren't generous until now." Calloway's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. Then, the door swung open. An officer entered, holding a flash drive. "We have the footage," he announced. Everyone gathered around as the video played on a laptop screen. The timestamp read 3:57 p.m. And there it was, clear as day. The lottery ticket fluttering across the parking lot. Thomas picking it up. Him looking at it, hesitating, then walking inside the store. David leaned back in his chair. "That's before Calloway even bought his ticket." A heavy silence filled the room. Richard Calloway turned pale. David looked straight at him. "Mr. Calloway, would you like to explain how you lost a ticket that hadn't been printed yet?" Calloway opened his mouth, then shut it. He had been caught. It was all a lie. One of the officers stepped forward. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with us for attempting to commit fraud." Calloway's face turned red. "Wait, this is ridiculous." Enough," David said firmly. "The footage doesn't lie." The officers placed Calloway in handcuffs and led him out of the room, his protest fading as the door closed behind them. Thomas sat there stunned. David turned to him, smiling for the first time. "Congratulations, Mr. Thomas. The money is yours." Linda clapped her hands. Emily wiped a tear from her eye. But Thomas barely heard them. Because at that moment, he wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about all the people he could help. And this time, nothing was going to stop him.